is directly connected to the peaceful development of the Asia-Pacific region. So in that very important article that Susie already mentioned, Secretary Clinton, our former Secretary of State, noted that the Asia-Pacific region, which we define as stretching from India to the western shores of the Americas, is a key driver of global politics. Obviously, it's a huge region. It spans 2 oceans, and it has about half the world's population, and includes many of the key engines of economic growth. And it's home to many of our key allies and important emerging powers like China, India, and Indonesia. So what Secretary Clinton argued in her article was that the future of politics, global politics, will be decided in Asia, not in Afghanistan, not in Iraq, and that the U.S. will be right in the center of the action. So 4.5 years ago, President Obama deliberately decided to make engagement in this region a strategic priority for the U.S. And as was mentioned, our strategy spans the full range of diplomatic, economic, political, cultural, security, and strategic interests. It involves the sustained work that we do with countries that have great diversity. So we're talking about nations that range from the world's largest countries to some of the smallest countries in the Pacific, from the world's 2nd and 3rd largest economies to those that are still in very early stages of development. And obviously it's founded on close cooperation with our allies and our friends. But at its most fundamental, its most core, the rebalance is based on the recognition that the U.S. interests are fundamentally based in the Asia-Pacific region. One very simple example that you can see from this is that Secretary Kerry has, in less than a year, visited Asia 3 times, showing his commitment to the rebalance. But there's a lot more besides just visits. Visits are very important, and they motivate action. But beyond that, we have been deeply engaged in modernizing our close partnerships, in lending our full support to institutions such as ASEAN and other regional forums, in building strong relations with emerging powers in the region. And in all 3 of these areas, I would point out that Indonesia is really central. And it's very important, I think, when you read the newspapers and the press, sometimes you just hear all about the defense side or the military side. I don't know why they get more press than the diplomats, but somehow they do. But the rebalance is not just about defense and hard power. It's everything from climate change issues to education exchange, to trade and investment, to energy cooperation. And so we're investing in this full scope of issues that matter to the region and also matter to the American people. So while it's true to say that the rebalance represents a renewed commitment to the Asia-Pacific region, it does build on our active and enduring presence in the region as a Pacific nation. We very much consider ourselves a Pacific nation. How many of you have traveled to the U.S.? A few. So probably most of you traveled to the West Coast. And the West Coast is very, very focused on the Pacific. And increasingly that has spread throughout the whole U.S. But our economic, our diplomatic, and our strategic ties in the region, in the Asia-Pacific region, are now greater than they've ever been in our entire history. Let me take a moment just to talk about economic ties. Our U.S. ties with the Asia-Pacific region in the economic field are strong and growing. We are by far the leading investor in the region, and our trade is expanding in the region. So, do we have any economists here? Anybody from the economic side? All right, I'll skip over the numbers a little bit, but I'll just give you some of them. In 2012, our foreign investment in the Asia-Pacific region stood at $622 billion. It's a lot of money. It's also a big increase. It's up 35% since the beginning of the Obama administration. During the same time, our exports to Asia-Pacific have grown an annual average of 7%, which is higher than our exports have grown to the rest of the world. It was mentioned the Trans-Pacific Partnership. This is a cornerstone of the President's economic policy in Asia, and it reflects a shared commitment to innovation, expansion of trade and investment opportunities, economic growth, and regional economic integration. So it is very important for us. But it's not the only thing we're doing on trade. We are also partnering with ASEAN members on expanding trade and investment through, this has a really long title. The short title is E3, simpler. The long title, just so you know it, is the U.S.-ASEAN Expanded Economic Engagement Initiative. And so that's one big effort to work with ASEAN members on trade facilitation. We also are working to foster cleaner energy cooperation through the U.S.-Asia-Pacific Comprehensive Energy Partnership. And we're promoting trade and investment liberalization through APEC. And you guys were just the host of APEC, so I'm sure you heard a lot about that. Diplomatically, I mentioned that Secretary Kerry has come to Asia 3 times in less than a year. It's also true that President Obama has hosted 7 Asian leaders in the U.S. in 2013 alone. Secretary Kerry is not the only one who's been traveling here. We've had 5 other cabinet members who have traveled to Asia. So for us, that is quite a lot. And just a sign of how deep our ties are. We obviously do have deep and sustained ties with our allies and with emerging partnerships. And our military and strategic alliances in the Asia-Pacific, we believe, have deterred conflict and have provided security for 60 years in the region that has, in the past and will in the future, support economic growth and political development. So the security part is a very important part of the rebalance, but as I said, it's just one of many aspects. Besides the economic and the diplomatic parts already mentioned, we're also working to support the regional architecture. So, probably the most popularly known in this area is ASEAN, but there are many other institutions that we are supporting, including the Lower Mekong Initiative, the PIF, the ARF, and APEC, which we just mentioned, all of which we believe are leading to a more prosperous, secure, and stable region, which is in everybody's benefit. As you know, Secretary Kerry came to Indonesia in October for APEC, and very unfortunately, President Obama was not able to come. This was, disappointing, but just a moment in domestic politics that caused that to happen. But the other leaders who were at APEC warmly welcomed and sought Secretary Kerry's active participation, which I think shows there's a demand from the region for U.S. engagement, and at the same time shows that we remain firmly focused on this dynamic region. After APEC, Secretary Kerry went to Brunei for the 5th U.S.-ASEAN Summit. And that summit covered economic cooperation between the U.S., ASEAN, and ASEAN countries. And it also focused on the full range of activities we're supporting with ASEAN, with civil society, and we have a particular focus on environmental goals. So we're working on combating illegal logging and wildlife trafficking, on encouraging low emissions development, on increasing water resource stewardship, and conserving biodiversity. All of those are really important for the world,